All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to give another minute or so for everyone to join, and then I will get things kicked off. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can see my little kickoff deck. All right. Are we able to see that okay? Okay. We'll give one more minute and then get started. Okay, let's go ahead and kick things off. Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. Today, we're going to be exploring market research fundamentals with Bijal Dalakia and Kim Greedle. Before we get into their amazing talk, though, I want to discuss where our Bench to Market series falls within the Biolocity program. So at Biolocity, we're focused on accelerating medical technology to market. We do that through non-dilutive funding, access to and mentorship from industry experts, project management, as well as commercialization education through our monthly Bench to Market series. These talks are also available on our YouTube channel. We have them organized into curated playlist. If you have not already subscribed to the Biolocity channel, please feel free to do so. I will also make sure that I include the link to subscribe in the chat of this talk. So today we're really fortunate to have two incredible experts joining us who bring deep experience. Sorry, all of my things are in healthcare and medtech market strategy. We have, oh my goodness, everything is moving around on me. I apologize. Bijal Dalakia is the founder and managing director of Afia Insights. With more than 20 years in healthcare market research, she has advised Fortune 500 companies, mid-sized firms, and startups on early-stage innovation, R&D strategy, and new product development. Her work is especially impactful for teams navigating technical markets and trying to understand where their technology fits commercially. We're also joined by Kim Greedle, Principal Consultant at FGA Insights. Kim brings decades of experience supporting medtech companies ranging from early-stage ventures to global market leaders. With a background spanning both engineering and marketing, she has a unique ability to bridge technical and commercial perspectives, which is incredibly valuable for teams preparing to move innovations toward the market. We're thrilled to have both of them here today to share their insights and support our community. And speaking of community, if you are not already part of our distribution list, you are able to join that here. Being on our distribution list will allow you to receive our program newsletter, as well as updates and events that are happening with the program, as well as within the innovation ecosystem. And as always, if you'd like more information about the program and all that we do, please look into our website. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Bijal and Kim. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And you two are welcome to take it away.
All right, awesome. Thank you. And bear with me while I share my screen. Hang on a moment. Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you all so very much for joining this webinar. And thank you, Jesse, and to the Biolocity team for inviting us. We truly appreciate the opportunity. As Jesse said, we're going to give you an introduction to market research, specifically in healthcare, and how it can support your journey from innovation to commercialization. Jesse did a fantastic job of introducing Kim and myself, so I'll just say a little bit about the company Afia Insights. You know, we specialize exclusively in conducting market research in the medtech and healthcare sectors. Um, our work is pretty much sitting at that intersection of medical technology, market dynamics, healthcare delivery, and reimbursement. all of our market research engagements are hitting on at least one, if not more, of these pillars. And we really work with, as Jesse mentioned, a broad range of companies. But our goal is really to gather data and to enrich it, to analyze it, and turn it into a cohesive story that helps support that journey from initial innovation to commercialization and help our clients make informed business decisions. Okay, excuse me while I do one thing. Yep, okay. All right. So on our agenda today, we've sort of got four key areas. We're going to do some fundamentals around market research, tell you what it is and how you conduct it. And then we're going to hit on two key topics within market research. One is market sizing, and then the other is market access research. And then we'll wrap up with some tips and tricks on, what the right approach is to market research, and then open it up to some Q&A. So, what is healthcare market research? Well, it's a structured process to gather, analyze, and interpret data about a market, including competitors, customers, products, pricing, and trends. And it's all about having the right information, the right analysis to make better business decisions, either about entering a market space or if you're already in it, it's about growing that market presence. Okay. So people often say, well, but is it really necessary? Why should I conduct market research? And our perspective is that it's a risk mitigation tool. You need it to de-risk your initiatives, your projects, your concepts, whatever it is that you're working on that you're hoping to commercialize. So some key needs that market research fulfills. It helps to ensure that your innovation is targeting unmet clinical needs or patient needs. You've got to make sure that whatever you're developing is something that the market wants. For example, if you're developing some sort of endoscope, is it truly needed by surgeons who use that endoscope, or is it only going to be adopted by a few? You've got to sort of understand those sort of market dynamics in order to be successful. You want to avoid spending time and money on innovation that the market will not adopt or buy. It's much better to understand early on in your sort of product development and innovation sort of process whether something is a go, that there's some warmth to the market, there's some opportunity for you. And if there isn't, it's much better to kill that project early, save your time, save resources, save money, and move on to idea number two or number three. It also helps you to understand your market opportunity and the market pathway to adoption. So it's all very well if you have an innovation, a concept that might be meeting an unmet need. That alone is not going to help you succeed. There's got to be a pathway for adoption by healthcare providers, insurers, healthcare systems, in order for you to be successful. So you've got to figure out, what is that pathway and how am I going to navigate through it to succeed? And then fourthly, but very importantly, market research helps to provide the analysis around your innovation that investors and management need to make funding decisions. They're not going to fund you if they don't feel confident that what you are developing, what you are wanting funding for, has some sense of market share. There's a willingness for the market to adopt it. And the same goes if you're in a company, that if there's no open checkbook, they are also looking to understand what the market opportunity is before they agree to fund your project. So, what are some of the key business questions that market research can help to answer? So, we've kind of grouped them into 6 buckets. First of all, unmet needs, which we spoke about a moment ago. So, what you're trying to do here is understand, what are the current pain points in a surgical procedure or in a therapy area? Is it that the current therapy is only effective in 50% of the patient population? So what about the other 50? Or, if I go back to my sort of endoscope example from a moment ago, are surgeons currently using instrumentation or tools that are still not quite able to help them navigate to the right piece of anatomy, or causes them to kind of strain in awkward ways. Therefore, there's an unmet need there. So you want to make sure that there is a pain point in the marketplace for your end customer, be it patients, be it surgeons, be it lab technicians, that you're trying to solve. Then you want to understand about the treatment pathways, where in the treatment process will your innovation fit? So, for example, how are patients treated today? What is the gold standard treatment? You need to understand all of these to understand where your innovation might fit in. So as an example, if you've developed something, it's a medical device that might be used in back surgeries. Well, the vast majority of patients are actually treated by pain medications, and then some of them go through physical therapy, and then only when all of those things fail will they go undergo surgery. So your market for that has, decreased. So you need to be aware where in the treatment process your innovation is going to fit. And then market size and market trends. What is the size of the market that you can realistically target? It's not going to be every patient or every healthcare professional out there. There's only going to be a certain segment that's going to use your therapy, use your device, prescribe your diagnostic. So you need to understand what those segments are that are receptive to adoption. And similarly, you need to be aware of what are some of the trends in the marketplace, because is there going to be a new diagnostic coming out? Is there a new therapy or a new procedure that could impact the viability of your own innovation? You've got to kind of think ahead as well, and not just base all of your research and analysis on what's currently in the marketplace. Market research can also help you test product concepts. So you need to understand, if you've got a device, for example, what do users think of it? And it's not just about knowing, do they like it or dislike it, that you need to understand, will they use it? Do they like the features of it? And do they like the functionality? What are the features that are most important to them? Because when you first come out onto the marketplace, you really want to do it with the minimal viable product. What can you come out with on the marketplace just to kind of get your foot in the door? And then with Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4, you can build in those additional features that you have in mind. You don't want to come to the marketplace with every single thing that you want your ideal technology or device or therapy to have. Then there's stakeholder adoption. What are the factors that are going to drive the prescribing of a particular therapy? What's going to drive the utility of your endoscope or your medical device? And then what are the barriers that are standing in the way to that stakeholder adoption? And this is really about trying to kind of build that health economic argument. How are you going to improve the life of patients? How are you going to save time? How are you going to save money? Those are the things that your innovation needs to deliver in order to support payer coverage. And Kim's going to be talking in a lot more detail about payers and payer coverage in a little bit later on. And then the competitive landscape. Who are your competitors? What is their market size? What is their market share? What is their product offering, and how are they selling into the marketplace? Because you've got to figure out how you're going to differentiate from them. It's not necessarily that every customer that comes to you is going to be a new customer, brand new, that's not using anything. Some of them are going to be using your competitor products. So you need to understand what's going to drive them from your competitor to you, and you've got to have some differentiation there. Okay. All right. So how do you conduct market research? There are two sort of key approaches to market research, and we'll walk through each of them in a moment. So the first one is secondary research, and this is looking at what's in the published domain. So you're gathering and analyzing data from published sources. And this is really great for initial market discovery when you're trying to learn what is going on. When you're trying to learn what's going on in the marketplace, when you want to develop some foundational insights, it's the first time that you're doing something, and you're trying to understand what it's useful for. So you want to develop some foundational knowledge. You want to look at treatment options and algorithms, and you want to look at surgical volumes. It may be interventional procedures. It may be diagnostic procedures. You want to get a sense of understanding of what's happening in the marketplace. You might want to understand what the market size as well, because the literature can give you a little bit of a sense of what's going on and how you might go about is this even a viable market for you to tap into? Secondary research, for the most part, tends to be relatively quick and inexpensive, but there may be some data acquisition costs involved. So, for example, if you're looking at market research reports, on average, they are between $3,500 and $6,000. So that's a hefty, expense, particularly if you are a startup. If you're trying to understand how medical procedures are currently reimbursed, you may need to look at claims databases, the databases that track claims that insurance companies file. So those databases are not cheap. The data there is expensive. So some of secondary research is very accessible. It may be free, and some may be expensive. So be aware of that. Then we have primary research, and this is essentially gathering insights and opinions from people. So, first of all, we have what we call qualitative market research when we're talking to maybe between 5 and 20 people. And this is really great for market discovery. So, you're here looking at unmet needs, concept testing. You may have a prototype device and you just want to kind of get feedback from a couple of healthcare professionals or patients. You might get an early sense of market size by understanding what it is that surgeons are currently doing, or diagnostic technicians, what are they currently doing? How often are they doing it? And it's also a great way of getting some early feel on what the reimbursement dynamics are. You can talk to healthcare professionals and understand, how do you get reimbursed for this procedure versus that procedure, or who within your practice is able to tell me these sorts of provide me with these types of insights. Then we have quantitative market research, and this is really talking to about 50 or more people. And you're not typically talking to them. Most oftentimes you're doing a survey with them. And the objective of quantitative market research, first of all, is to validate whatever you might have learned from the secondary literature and also what you might have learned from qualitative market research. And then you can build on that as well. So quantitative market research is an excellent approach for doing market sizing, because you want to get a feel from a larger volume of physicians or a larger volume of patients, not the 5 or 20 that you've spoken to. If you're doing pricing research, you certainly want to get the opinion of a larger volume of people than just a handful. Or if you're testing promotional materials, marketing materials, this is where quantitative market research comes into play. Um, so how does primary research compare to secondary research? Well, it's a little bit more expensive and it can take longer to execute. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, you've got to find the right people to talk to. So you've got to recruit them to participate in the research study on your behalf for you. And then you do have to incentivize them. They are expecting some degree of payment for their time that they are offering. You need to have experienced moderators, particularly those that can kind of stick to track with whatever discussion, whatever questions you need answered, and won't kind of deviate when the clinician, for example, or the patient goes on a tangent. You want people who can help keep focus to what you're trying to learn. And then if you're doing surveys, then surveys need to be programmed. You have to have them programmed on a website. You've got to program them in such a way that you can do the back end statistical analysis. So those are some of the reasons as to why primary market research tends to be a little bit more expensive. Okay, all right. So who do you conduct market research with? And particularly sort of young innovators, new startup companies, they sort of tend to focus on the end users. Well, who's going to use my product? Is it going to be the patient? If it's a therapy, it could be a lab technician, it could be a physician or a surgeon. And yes, those are they're certainly the right people that you want to be talking to. But there's some other folks as well. So, for example, if you've got a product that's designed for children, then you obviously can't be interviewing them. So, you got to talk to the caregivers. If you have got, if you're trying to learn about a marketplace, you might actually be better off talking to some industry experts in the first instance, some KOLs, key opinion leaders, some thought leaders, because they've been working in these, segment that you are targeting for a number of years. They've been to conferences, they read literature, they might participate in clinical trials. So they have a breadth of experience. And so just talking to a few of those might give you the information that you are seeking and helps kind of ground your research around your innovation. The other key group that people often forget is the decision makers. They forget to talk to them. And the decision makers are key because they are the ones who are going to determine if your technology, your concept, your therapy, or innovation, is it really going to get adopted in the marketplace? So some of the decision makers fall into a couple of different buckets. We have value analysis committees, or VACs as they are known, and they typically sit in a health system and they may comprise healthcare providers. So you may have physicians on them, you may have nurses on them, but you also have health economic experts. You might have heads of department, you may have folks from supply chain sitting on them, and they are all looking at the information about your innovation, your therapy, and they're looking at it from a perspective of, what is the clinical evidence behind this? How safe is it to use? And what kind of patient segments am I going to be treating this therapy with, or using this device on? And if they give it a thumbs up, then you've kind of got that next layer of management that comes in, and they're really looking at your innovation, your concept from a stronger health economics lens. They're trying to understand, is this going to save on OR time? Am I going to be able to do more procedures in my hospitals? Am I going to be able to discharge my patients earlier? Is this going to reduce the number of adverse events that my patients have, and therefore they don't need treatment for those adverse events? So what they're really trying to understand is, how is this innovation going to save time? How is it going to save money? And at the same time, improve the life of your patients. So that's the lens through which they are looking at. Then we have supply chain and procurement. So these are folks that you may be contracting with. If the first two layers give it a thumbs up, you've kind of moved to the contracting stage, and you've got to win with procurement and supply chain. And so you certainly need to talk to them to understand what they are looking for. And if you don't sell directly into a health system, then you've got distributors and GPOs, and these are entities that kind of like middlemen. So you sell to them, and they then in turn will negotiate contracts on your behalf with hospitals, and they have deeper buying power, so to speak. And then finally, the insurance, the payers are kind of lost on the list, but as always, they remain one of the most important people that you need to speak with. Because if you don't get coverage for your therapy, if you don't get coverage for the utility of your device within certain procedures, it's not going to have much legs to stand on. And Kim is going to be covering that much more in just a few moments. All right, so what are some of the market research approaches that are used, and what are the challenges? So with secondary market research, there's a ton of sources out there. We've got syndicated reports, we've got statistical sources that are out there, business websites, news sources, company websites if you're trying to learn about your competitors, journal publications, there are regulatory databases like the FDA, and there's claims databases where you can gather information about how certain therapies or procedures are reimbursed. So a ton of information that's out there that you can tap into. But there are some challenges with these resources. First and foremost is data currency, particularly with large syndicated market research reports. By the time they get published, it may be a year since the company did all of the research, and it takes them about a year or 6 months or whatever to publish it. The data may already be out of date. The data in these reports may be at a very high level. It may lack the specificity for the market segment that you are particularly interested in, because these reports are designed to be picked up by a broad range of customers. So they're not going to get specific and granular to what you are looking for. There may be data conflicts. When you look at one report, it gives you the market size as being $75 million, and you look at another report, and it might say it's only 50 million, and you don't quite know which one is correct because the methodology to derive those numbers is different. There's also information overload. There's a lot of information out there. When you start to kind of dig into a particular area, you can easily get overloaded and you're not quite sure, what is the information you need to focus on. And it can also be challenging to navigate to the right data. For example, the government provides a lot of great statistics on healthcare utilization, on disease states. But to find that information can be difficult. You're navigating deeper and deeper into various government websites, and then you come to a point where you've actually got to download it in a particular format, and then you need special tools to interrogate it. So it's not always easy to get to the right data. And then finally, the data acquisition costs that we just talked about a moment ago. They sometimes data is fantastic and it's free, and other times, you could be paying up to 4 or 5 figures to get the right information. Then we have primary research. There's a range of different methods that can be used in primary research. The most common is in-depth interviews, which are typically covered by telephone or the web. That's kind of the norm nowadays. Sometimes you may do in-person interviews, but for the most part, it tends to be by web, where you can do focus groups. And this is where you have a couple of different participants, as they're called. So you may have a couple of physicians or a couple of patients that you engage on some web platform, and you ask them questions. And so you're learning from what they're telling you in response to those answers, but you're also learning from the conversation that they are having with one another, and that can be very insightful. Then we have surveys, and these are your typical, choose between these 5 options, or how likely are you, how unlikely are you to select a particular option. These are multiple choice questions that you typically program onto a survey. A survey platform, I should say. And then the two other approaches are online communities and patient journeys. These are slightly more specialized techniques that you may not be aware of. And this is where you engage people again on, usually it's a web platform, but you engage them on a longitudinal study. So it's a market research study that may take several weeks to complete or several months. So you kick off with an initial set of questions. You receive the responses to them, and you kind of analyze them, and then you learn from them, and you pose another set of questions. Or you might ask patients, hey, send me a video clip of how you feel today because you have, condition X. Or tell me about the last hospital time you visited the hospital or the doctor. How did you feel? So it tends to be more immersive research, these, online communities or patient journeys. And typically, as the name suggests, it's done with patients. Physicians, typically, you don't get them on these longitudinal studies because they're only available for limited time periods, and you're more likely to do surveys with them or conduct interviews with them. And then finally, there's ethnography, which is where you're observing patients or physicians in action as they're doing their job, and you essentially learning from observing them. Some channel challenges here is that you've got to comply with HIPAA. You may have to, you will have to pay them incentives or honorarium as well for their time. You've got to recruit the right, specific market segment you're interested in. So it's not just that you want to talk to ophthalmologists, but you want to talk to ophthalmologists that may have laser technology in their practice, particularly if you have a new type of laser that you're looking to bring to the market. You have to keep the discussions very focused, otherwise you can go off at a tangent based on what they say, and then you're not in alignment with your objectives. And then with these longitudinal studies, you do get drop off over a period of time. So these are some of the things that you need to be aware of. All right. People always ask us, what about AI in market research? And yes, it's definitely here, and there are some positives about it. It's great for getting educated on a topic and providing you with some foundational insights. You kind of tap it in, you get a little summary, and you might also get some references to it. So you've got some additional resources that you can read to, further build your foundational knowledge. It can take a first pass at generating questions that you might want to ask physicians if you're doing an interview, or if you wanted to do conducting a survey as part of market research. It can do a great job at that first pass, but you probably still need to, come into it and add your own flavor of questions. And it can also speed up the overall data analysis process. But there are some downsides to AI. So the insights that you may get out of AI is, again, very high level, and it may not be granular. It may not be specific to the market segment that you're particularly interested in. You might sometimes find that it's mining data sources that are not necessarily peer reviewed. I've certainly seen some where, it's tapping into blog sites. And that isn't to say a blog site is bad information. It's certainly somebody's opinion, and it may be valid. But in the beginning, when you're first starting to learn about a market, you really want to look at peer reviewed, validated, and vetted sources. It doesn't allow for that intuitive line of questioning that happens in primary research. So if you stick to the questions that the AI has developed for you, you're going to miss out on some valuable insight that you could have gained if you don't ask, a patient or a physician questions based on something important that they have said. And hallucinations are still a problem. Sometimes you can, use it to do data analysis, and then you look at it and you say, I was in that interview. That is not what was said. That is not what the primary research told me. So hallucinations, kind of getting facts mixed up, is still a problem. So use AI with caution. We would say use it for that initial learning, but make sure that you have expert interpretation. So now we kind of want to talk to you a little bit about some key areas of healthcare market research. There are sort of 5 areas that we typically see. It's market discovery and validation. We do market sizing and opportunity assessment, concept testing, and determining what the minimal viable product is for coming into a marketplace with. There's market access and adoption dynamics, and there's messaging and positioning research. In the interest of time, we are not going to cover all of these 5 areas. We're just going to pick on number 2 today, which is market sizing, and number 4, which is market access research. So let's talk about market sizing and why is it a must-do research analysis. And there's a couple of key reasons for this. One is that the market size determines whether an innovation truly addresses a substantial unmet need in the marketplace. So you're avoiding wasting time, avoiding resource time spent on resources that are too small to be viable in the marketplace. So you want to kill those projects quickly and move forward. you need market sizing for forecasting your revenue potential. It's the basis for forming revenue projections and doing pricing models. And so it reduces the risk of grounding your forecasts in, assumptions. You ground it more so in factual data that you have covered. It's also important for competitive benchmarking. You want to know not just your market size, but the market size of your competitors and what is their share and how saturated is the marketplace. You've got to figure out, is there room for disruption with your innovation? So if you are successful and get to commercialization, it allows for more targeted marketing and positioning versus the competition. Then there's strategic planning. This informs key functions such as manufacturing. How many widgets do you need to manufacture to bring to the marketplace? Um, your distribution channels, your marketing opportunities, and then your sales rep. How many sales reps do you need? What type of education do you need based on who they are selling to? So it's helpful to understand the market size and segments that you are pursuing. Helps for goal setting and resource allocation. And then finally, investor appeal. Investors assess market size to gauge the opportunity before they commit capital. So they're looking for a clear and compelling market size from you that is secure and it's validated, so they are open to funding. I am going to speed up a little bit because I know we're running short on time, and I want to make sure we get to Kim's section as well. So, a little bit about market sizing and what the addressable market is. So, there are three elements to this. There's the total addressable market, it's called the TAM, the serviceable addressable market, which is the SAM, and then the serviceable obtainable market, which is called the SOM. So, what is the TAM? This is essentially how big is the universe of potential customers. It assumes that every person out there that could be is available essentially to buy your product, to use your therapy, to use your surgical device. But that's not, unfortunately, that's not the real world. Then from there, you narrow down to the serviceable addressable market. So what are the customer segments that I can target? And this is based on external constraints. So it could be your regulatory, it could be the indications that you have gotten regulatory approval for. Those are only the segments that you can viably sell and market to. Or you may only have marketing rights here in the US, therefore you can't sell in Canada. And then finally, there is the SOM, which is the serviceable obtainable market. How many customers can you realistically capture? So this is the market share based on who's likely to adopt. It's not necessarily going to be every patient that your therapy is going to get prescribed for. It's not going to be every surgeon that uses your tool. It's that much smaller segment that you need to uncover. And there are two key approaches to market sizing, and I'm not going to go through the examples today, but I just want to make you aware that, there's the top-down approach. This is where you start from a large external market number. Typically, you obtain this from the published literature, and then you apply a series of filters to it to help you narrow down to the market segment that is of interest to you. And the other approach is kind of more of a bottoms-up market assessment approach to sizing. And this is where you take some data that you have specifically acquired from your customers. It could be patients, it could be healthcare providers, it could be surgeons, for example, and you use that information, and from there you build up into developing your market size. There is no right or wrong approach. We typically use both. We often start with a bottoms-up approach because that allows us to be a little bit more granular and a little bit more specific towards the market size of our clients. But we'll also use a top-down approach as well to help kind of see if we can triangulate in. Whatever approach we use, the key thing is that we don't build a market size based on one data point, but multiple data points, and we always try and triangulate in. That is the approach to you getting a more accurate market size. So, key tip, don't rely on a single data point. Okay. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kim now to talk about market access. Kim, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Unmuted and now ready to talk about market access. As Vijel said, we're going to provide a very high level overview of market access and reimbursement strategy research. And we'll start with this slide, which is sort of a primer on what market access is and how the reimbursement system works here in the United States. Market access is essentially the key to revenue generation for new medical technologies and therapies. When we talk about market access, what we generally think about is, everything that encompasses ensuring that your innovation can be reimbursed and used in a real world setting at a price that healthcare systems and payers and patients can afford. So this slide outlines, again, the basics for reimbursement within the United States. This would be different if we were talking about any of the EU countries, for example. So it's important to know that this framework here pertains only to the United States. And the three pillars of reimbursement are coding, coverage, and payment. And we've added a fourth here, evidence, which is almost always needed to varying degrees to secure coverage determinations from payers. One of the most important things to note here is that regulatory approval does not automatically guarantee reimbursement. It's also important to note that medical devices and other technologies are not reimbursed directly. The payment levels that are established are never to pay for a device or a technology. They are rather to reimburse physicians and healthcare facilities for the procedures in which those devices and technologies are used. This is a little bit different when we're talking about pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are often directly reimbursed. Not always, sometimes they are reimbursed as part of a procedure, but codes are still needed to support those prescriptions. So I want to move through this four-pillar system here. So let's start with coding. The first thing you want to understand about your innovation is whether it fits into the current coding system. This is a system of codes that is used by both CMS, Medicare, and commercial payers. They each use that same identical system of codes. So if your technology is not covered by these codes, you might need to obtain a new code, and that will require significant investment. So that's both from a financial and a timeline perspective. So that's something that you should really think about early in the process. Is our innovation going to, fit into that current coding system? And if not, you need to allocate finances and time in order to get that new code in place. Next, thinking about coverage. Even if you have a code, the payer could decide not to cover it. Payers really need to know that the procedure or the therapy adds value for their particular patients. So, when a new code is developed, a new coverage determination is always needed. But even with existing codes, if your innovation expands the indication, there could be barriers to coverage. We're all familiar with prior authorization, for example, And that is just one mechanism that payers use to manage access to expensive therapies and procedures. On payment, CMS and Medicare typically lead the way, and they establish the baseline through developing relative value units, RVUs, that are associated with payment amounts at both the national and local levels. Commercial payers generally base their rate on these RVUs, but they generally pay at a little bit higher rates than Medicare. And so it's important to know whether the population your innovation treats is covered predominantly by Medicare or by a commercial insurance. It's also important to know that payment rates vary significantly by region, by payer, even within different commercial payer within the same region. So even from healthcare system to healthcare system, where payers have negotiated different rates with different healthcare systems. So finally, we've added this pillar of evidence here. All payers place high value on evidence and the demonstration of value for their patients. So the type of evidence required will vary depending on what your innovation is. So for medical therapies, for example, clinical trials are always needed. But for a class 1 medical device, the evidence bar is typically much, much lower. But whenever new codes come into play, things get a little bit more complicated, and there usually is some kind of evidence requirement associated with that. So now moving on to market access research on the next slide. The key question here is, what do you need to know to ensure that your innovation goals as you go through the product development cycle line up with reimbursement reality? So what we've found over the years in working with medtech innovators is that securing appropriate reimbursement often poses significant challenges and is often something that catches people off guard, catches, startups off guard, and sometimes they leave this consideration until the end of their product development cycle. So we're really encouraging startups to think about reimbursement very early in the product development cycle, along with regulatory, along with clinical. So we've outlined on this slide 3 initiatives that we, recommend you take on during that product development process. And all of these initiatives will depend on leveraging both the secondary and primary research methods that Bijal has been talking about here. So first of all, looking at the left-hand side of the slide, you have to have a crystal clear understanding of how your innovation fits into the clinical pathway. So who is your patient population and what characteristics distinguish them? Are they typically Medicare patients, or are they covered by commercial insurance? What other demographics distinguish them? What types of healthcare providers or professionals will likely have a role in using your innovation, or prepping the product, or purchasing the device? Where is it used? That's really important because it can affect payment levels. So is it used in the home? Is it used in a physician's office or a hospital OR or the hospital bedside? So you really need to understand that, and all of that is going to affect the reimbursement level. And also you want to just talk with healthcare providers and other decision makers early and often to understand this clinical workflow and establish viability and value within that workflow. And then second, we need to think about mapping out the reimbursement landscape and really digging into the coding and payment details that I talked about on the prior slide. You need to understand all of the constraints of that reimbursement landscape and how you can support a sustainable business within that landscape. So what does your pricing need to look like? That landscape is really going to help you hone in on that. And then finally, you really need to follow the money and get into the nitty-gritty of how your innovation will impact finances for both physicians and facilities. And you really need to craft an economic case demonstrating cost benefits for all of the stakeholders. So I think with that, we're going to shift gears a little bit and present a case study on the next slide. Great. So we wanted to sort of, give you an illustration of how this market research that we've been talking about can, in reality, help innovators move forward on their commercialization pathway. So in this case, we were working with a company that had a developmental stage surgical device that could simplify a procedure and make it possible to perform it in a physician's office setting versus a hospital operating room. And so in this situation, our client needed to understand all of the healthcare provider and healthcare administrator stakeholders and what they valued about the new innovation, what the potential barriers were to adoption, and what they would require to embrace the change and shift this procedure to a different site of care. They also needed to understand how the shift in the sites of service would influence the practice finances for these stakeholders. So to address these needs, we conducted a wide-ranging qualitative research program focused on physicians, anesthesiologists, and healthcare administrators, as well as US commercial payers. And then we mapped out the codes and payment rates across various scenarios and analyzed the implications for practice finances at both the physician and the facility levels. And in the end, we were able to establish that one, there was good evidence that the financial incentives could support the shift in care for some market segments. So we recommended some key market segments for our client to focus on in its initial market launch.
Right. Thank you, Kim. I am going to skip this next slide because I know we're running short on time, but this is just, some key tips on how to approach market research. The key thing, though, that I wanted to emphasize is that market research is not something you do at one point in your sort of innovation journey and then you leave it. It's not a point in time activity. It's something you should be doing on a regular basis. So once you get one set of answers, then you got to sit down and think, okay, well, I know this, but what else do I need to know? What are the gaps in my knowledge? What are new questions that I need to ask based on what I've learned? Who else do I need to talk to? I've spoken to physicians. Maybe I need to talk to practice managers, or maybe I need to talk to heads of department in the hospital. How much, what other information do I need to dig out from the literature? What else can I, learn that way? And then you take what you learn and you're continuously updating any sort of market sizes or market models that you've developed. You're always fine-tuning. You're always trying to make sure that you're on top of your game so that you have an accurate assessment of the market as you keep growing and learning. Okay. So just to finish off, market research really helps to drive business decisions. It validates the demand before investment decisions are made. This is how you secure funding. It guides your pricing and your reimbursement strategy. It helps you to identify some of the barriers to adoption so you can start thinking about how you overcome them. It just kind of strengthens your commercial success and it reduces risk, which is a big thing. Market research is not just about learning, it's also about learning in order to reduce your risk of failure and improve your chances of market adoption. So we think of market research not something optional that you do, but it's foundational for your successful commercialization. And with that, we'd love to open it up for any questions.
Yes, I see one question here. So it says, thank you, Bijal and Kim. I was wondering whether the standard market research approaches used for medical products, such as primary versus secondary research and top-down versus bottom-up sizing, also apply when evaluating a service-based business, such as a life sciences consulting firm, in terms of market size and competitive landscape.
Hmm, that is interesting. I mean, most of our clients are either selling a therapy or selling, looking to sell a device or a diagnostic. But a lot of what we've talked about in terms of market sizing, top down, bottoms up, that's applicable across all industries. It's not something specific to healthcare. So yes, you can use the same principles across other industry sectors, such as healthcare service delivery. And in fact, the approaches around primary and secondary are also valid across different industry sectors. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, next question. It says, thank you for the great talk. Very practical. Quick question. How do you recommend best guarding against competition that might be in stealth mode or otherwise hard to spot?
Yes, and really competitors, particularly in the early stages of innovation, there may be no signs that they are out there or they're looking to work in the same area as you. Typically, one of the first signs is actually patent analysis. They have to at least have patents in the area of interest to you. So if you have a suspicion about a company, you may want to look at their patents to see, what have they published lately, or you may do a patent landscaping engagement to understand who's out there, who's also kind of innovating in the same space as you. We didn't really cover patents today. That's kind of a whole, we do some work in that space, not a lot, but that's a whole different ballgame. But I think that would be probably one of the best ways to know who else is out there.
All right. And then another question. How much might an in-depth market research cost a company? Is there any way to make it more affordable for an earlier stage company?
Um, yes, we tend to scale the market research based on who the client is. So if it's a startup, just speaking from our own experience, we're not going to suggest a bells and whistles market research program because we know that that is not something a startup can afford. We work with you to understand, first, what are your key business questions? What are your priority questions? And then we design a little program specific to those needs so that, the costs are contained. And then, as you go down the line, you may need more questions answered or more people, that you need to speak to. That's when the size of the research program can grow. But we are acutely aware we do certainly work with startups, and we do know that budgets are tight.
Excellent. One last question I think we'll have time for. How do you know when you've talked to enough customers to really understand the market?
Oh, that is another good question. Kim, do you want to maybe take that one?
Yeah, yeah. I think um, when we're doing qualitative research programs, we typically look at numbers like Bajel was, referencing earlier, under 20. But sometimes you're looking at a market where your audiences are clearly segmented. So you might need to talk with more customers in that case because they might have different value propositions based on different segmentation. For example, maybe you have some surgeons who are working in an ASC setting versus a hospital OR, and they have different parameters and different values based on some constraints in those different settings. But typically, when you're starting to get the same answers, when you're starting to get uniform answers after a while, or the answers are starting to fall into, one of three buckets, um, that's when you're starting to hone in on some clarity and you feel like, okay, we've gotten to our we've learned what we can learn from this program here. Does that make sense?
It
Yeah,
does.
yeah, I would say usually by about the 10th to 15th person, we're starting to hear the same things again and again.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of an average ballpark. It may not be feasible always to talk to that many people, particularly if you're in the early stages, you can only talk to five. And it is what it is at that point, but you'll still get some good insights that way.
Fantastic. Well, I don't see any additional questions that have come in, and we are just 1 minute past time. So thank you so much, Bijal and Kim, for joining us. This was a fantastic talk. Love hearing about this subject. We will be sending out some additional resources after the talk to make sure that you can connect with Bijal and Kim if you'd like, as well as some notes on the talk and a link to the YouTube recording. Wonderful. Thanks
Awesome.
so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.